Hello everyone, Alan Sens here, and welcome to this segment on nuclear arms control today and in the future, controlling fissile materials. Now obviously, if we want to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons around the world, controlling the proliferation of fissile materials is going to be a very important component of that effort. So this video is really all about how do we go around trying to develop stronger mechanisms to control the spread of fissile material around the world. So let's get started. So by the time we're done, you should be familiar with the current issues facing efforts to control fissile materials. Now, when we talk about the proliferation of fissile materials, obviously the first step is we want to prevent state-to-state transfer. That is to say, one government either openly or illicitly transferring fissile material to another country. But because a lot of that effort is already closely controlled or managed or part of wider arms control agreements, there's a particular concern about trafficking in radioactive materials. So let's look at that first. There is an incident and trafficking database. It is run by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, and it was established in 1995. And basically what it is it's a repository, it's a record, and it accounts for incidents of illicit trafficking in nuclear and radioactive materials. There's about 130 countries who participate in this, so if you have an incident of trafficking that you've uncovered, you report it to the Incident and Trafficking Database. What they've done in this database is they've divided the incidents that are reported by participating countries into three categories. And the categories themselves are actually kind of interesting. But overall, from January 1993 to December 2016, a total of 3,068 incidents were reported to the ITDB. So that's quite a few. Now, of these incidents, 270 of them involved a confirmed or likely act of trafficking or malicious use. Obviously, this is the category of greatest concern. Even more worrying, of these 270 incidents, 12 of them involved highly enriched uranium, 2 involved plutonium, and 4 involved plutonium, beryllium, neutron sources. It's also the case that a small number involved kilogram quantities of potentially weapons-grade nuclear material. So obviously this is very worrying. It's bad enough that the kinds of substances such as enriched uranium, plutonium, and plutonium, beryllium, neutron sources are out there and are being discovered in terms of illicit trafficking. But it's even more worrying that some of them involve kilogram quantities, because of that's of course the types of quantities that are needed to build a bomb. Here's just a bit of a timeline, gives us an idea of what the database tells us over certain periods. We have 1993 over here, and we cross through to 2016 over here. And you can see there's a fair bit of variance from year to year, but overall, the pattern's fairly steady. Maybe, if I'm being optimistic, I would say there's been a decline since 2007, so that's encouraging. But again, there is a fairly substantial record of incidents of this kind that the database shows. Now, if we move on to the next category, so we're back to that 3,068 number again here, 904 of those incidents involved the second category of trafficking, situations for which there was insufficient information to determine if they were related to trafficking or malicious use. So essentially this is the we're not sure category. So they weren't sure in 904 cases whether these cases were related to trafficking or malicious use. In other words, they didn't have clear evidence that they were. And again, somewhat worrying, 3 of these incidents involved highly enriched uranium, 1 involved plutonium, and 4 involved plutonium, beryllium, neutron sources. So obviously, again, another element of concern coming out of this category in the database. And here's what the record tells us, looking through the database, again, 1993 through 2016. Not sure what happened in 2006. My goodness, that's quite a spike. But overall, you can see that the number of incidents are quite consistent. Let's move on to the final category used by the ITDB. So again, 3,068 incidents, right? Of those, 1,894 were unrelated to trafficking or malicious use. The majority being unauthorized disposal, unauthorized shipment, discovery of radioactive materials, including some in consumer goods. That's always very encouraging to hear. And these then are not of very much concern to us in the proliferation realm. And again, this chart is showing the incidents over time from 1993 through to 2016. So what's the arms control piece here? Well, the big piece is the idea that a fissile material cutoff treaty should be created, an FMCT as it's known. And the whole idea here is to prohibit the production of highly enriched uranium and plutonium. And of course, part of this is that there's already an awful large supply of both out there in the international system. It was estimated that the global stockpile of highly enriched uranium in January of 2017 was 1,340 tons, with a margin of error of plus or minus 125 tons. Well, if you've got a margin of error of plus or minus 125 tons, you know you're in trouble already. And of course, this is in highly enriched uranium, so that's a very great concern. The global stockpile of plutonium is about 520 tons. So again, that's a lot. So part of this is going to be accounting for who has what. And obviously, a fissile material cutoff treaty needs to have a pretty firm idea of how much of this material is in the world if we're going to have a good handle on being able to control or manage it and its transfer. Okay. Now, there is something of a production moratorium in place right now, at least amongst some countries. The United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Russia have basically all declared that they have stopped producing fissile material for nuclear weapons, and it's believed that China has done the same for highly enriched uranium in 1987 and plutonium in 1991. So your 5 declared nuclear weapon states all say they have stopped producing fissile material. So on the one hand, that's encouraging. The problem, of course, is if you want to develop a fissile material cutoff treaty, you need broader support, not just from the declared nuclear weapon states, but from other countries that also possess nuclear weapons. Now, if you're a signatory to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, non-weapon states are already prohibited from producing or acquiring fissile material for weapons. Okay, so that's already in place. But what a fissile material cutoff treaty would do was provide new restrictions for the 5 recognized nuclear weapon states, the US, Russia, the UK, France, and China, and for the 4 states that are not NPT members but have nuclear weapons, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea. And of course, many of these countries don't like the idea of a fissile material cutoff treaty. And therein lies the problem. You don't have the kind of global support you would need to successfully negotiate, ratify, and implement a fissile material cutoff treaty. It doesn't help at all that this idea has basically stalled in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, the big sort of central focal point for global arms control negotiations, and it's stalled in the Conference on Disarmament for the reason that many things, if not most things, have stalled in the Conference on Disarmament, and that's because countries simply cannot agree. There is no art of the possible here, as long as countries are resistant to the idea of a global ban on the production of fissile materials. Okay. So now you should be familiar with some of the current issues facing efforts to control fissile materials. Okay. I know that wasn't very encouraging, but it remains one of the areas of hope in arms control, quite frankly, because it's believed that if you can get support from the 5 declared nuclear weapons states for a fissile material cutoff treaty, you might have greater prospects for success down the road. It doesn't appear there's been a lot of progress lately, but it is possible, and it remains one of the hopes of the arms control community that a fissile material cutoff treaty may be achievable in the not too distant future. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you again soon.